Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Okay, so I'm just taking us back to the basics of what the organic program says. I know everybody is familiar with this, but the part about pests, it says organic really should be, what should be excluded, and that the pests, weeds, and diseases must be controlled through cultural practices and the introduction of predators or parasites when these are insufficient. So predators and parasites are kind of a step above. When these are inefficient, may be supplemented with approved substances on the national list. And so I'm just going to emphasize that for these, so my point of the whole thing is that these high value fruit production systems all rely on many materials from the national list, and we saw that yesterday, and we're going to see this in all the crops that I'm talking about. And then the other thing I'm going to talk about is where organic and conventional use some of the same inputs, and then value some of these inputs. So I'm going to talk about raisin grapes. I was happy that David mentioned grapes. It's sort of it's been absent really from this conference for some reason, even though there's so much grape production in Washington. Strawberries in Salinas Valley on the coast, and Joji gave a talk about that on Tuesday. Pears in the Sacramento Valley. And I already forgot again, I have a lot of co-authors on these studies. For each of these crops, we have an organic study and a conventional study. And what we do is we interview for the conventional studies, obviously, conventional growers who are successful growers, kind of mid-size, organic growers, successful existing organic growers, and we come up with these hypothetical farms and say, what do you do? Kind of a calendar of operations is where we start out, and then what inputs do you use for each of those operations, and then cost them out for this hypothetical farm. So what I'm presenting is not a statistical average in any way. They're just we're vetted examples, realistic examples, but you could design an organic farm or a conventional farm in any number of different ways. And Chuck Ingalls is here, who's been a co-author and instrumental to the Pear studies. And the strawberry studies were Mark Bolda and Laura Torti, and the grape studies was Steve Vasquez and several other people, so farm advisors from throughout California who work in these crops and who identify the growers and work with growers. Then so I like this term purposive sample. It makes it sound a little more scientific than just sort of we winged it or made it up. And then the prices for the inputs we actually get from the local input suppliers, not directly from the farmers. We just ask the farmers, what do you do, and then price it out with people who actually sell the stuff. Okay, so fertility. For the strawberries, we had compost used, cover crops were used in all of the organic systems and not in the conventional systems, but certainly could be are typical in a lot of our conventional orchards, but just not in this particular study. Liquid fertilizer, just in the organic, the foliar applications, just in the organic, and the synthetic fertilizers, of course, in synthetic in all of the conventional studies. Weed control, the strawberries use disking between the rows, hand weeding in both conventional and organic. The raisins, we had disking between the rows with both in conventional and organic. Then of course the herbicide use along the tree and vine row is not used by organic, and there really are no organic herbicides that are commonly used, even though they do exist. They're very expensive and not very effective. But what we'll see later is that the amount of, so what's important, I think, is that where Hand weeding is used as a common practice in conventional. It's also used in organic, but but always to a greater extent in organic. But we don't see the hand weeding in pears is minimal. It's just around the trees for irrigation purposes, and may or may not happen in all tree crop production. But we don't see this kind of myth of instead of spraying herbicides, people are out there hoeing. You don't really see that in commercial organic ventures. Disease control, happily for organic growers, sulfur is an allowed substance, so that's what makes the strawberry production, organic strawberry production, and grape production possible. I don't think it would be possible without sulfur. Microbials, then physical removal of fruit in strawberries is very important and very expensive at harvest time. And that's because there's no material that's registered for organic strawberries that controls for botrytis. And let's see, and then synthetic fungicides, of course. Then finally, with pest controls, interestingly, the two crops that use beneficial release, strawberries for codling moth, pears for codling moth, and strawberries for mites, both the organic and the conventional use the same beneficials or pheromone confusion in the case of pears. So in the case of pears, it's exactly the same pheromone confusion for the codling moth, but for the strawberries, the release of mites happens 4 times for the organic, at least in our studies, and 2 times for the conventional. So it's the same material, but more because the conventional is also using synthetic materials. And then, let's see, now I can't remember what. Okay, there's something that was the same that I can't remember what it was for the pears. I think it was, yeah, anyway. Okay, so how much time do I have? 7 minutes. Oh, okay. So all of these studies are online for people who want to study the nitty-gritty detail of what was used in what crop and what month and what rates and what costs. But just to look at what the details of the different systems, and here's just the example for strawberries, and I don't have this detail in this talk for all of the crops, but you see that the fertility becomes more complicated in organic, where there's compost, there's foliar application, and also the fertigation, whereas the conventional has synthetic fertilizer drilled, and then also fertigation, and of course different materials in the fertigation. So I guess it's really the compost. And then what also is complicated about talking about strawberries is some growers will have a cover crop preceding these strawberries, and some growers will have broccoli preceding, so it's hard. So I didn't put in a cost of a cover crop here, but certainly a cover crop cost could be attributable to strawberries. And the other thing that I should mention about strawberries, maybe right at the beginning, is when we start talking about these rotations with strawberries. For organic strawberries, you'd grow it at most every other year, up to once every 5 years, whereas with the conventional strawberries, they're fumigating so that they can grow the strawberries every year. So really, like looking at a 1-year snapshot of organic strawberries and conventional strawberries isn't really correct economically or agronomically, because it's a big picture thing, and that's really true of any annual crop in organic versus conventional. The rotation is going to be very different, but I don't think anything's more extreme than strawberries. So another point I wanted to make, that really I would say that strawberries is one of the most difficult crops to grow organically, and that grapes are about the easiest because you've got the sulfur and they don't need a lot of nitrogen. So we've got the two extremes in this example. So we look at disease control for organic. We're using micronized sulfur and copper. We're using wettable sulfur and conventional, so that's something that, so these sulfurs again are allowable materials in organic. So then, and the number of somewhere I wrote down the number of applications, but anyway, it would be similar. So that flint and rally would be materials that are not allowed in conventional. Then we get to this pest and disease control, and it's not a pretty picture in either system. We have a lot of different materials. The micronized sulfur is used in both organic and conventional. The codling moth pheromone confusion is used in organic and conventional. Myco-shield is also something that can be used in organic and conventional. And then in all of our tree fruits, we see dormant oil being applied in the wintertime, and that's something that's used in organic and conventional. I left it out here, but it should be there. Oh, I have the oil up there, the January oil, sorry. So that is up there. But you see, it's a barrage in both cases of constant pest management treatments, which is just the main point that I want to make. And let's see. Okay. So here are the costs, and I think it's interesting to put these all on the same graph, because look at the inputs for the raisins. Wouldn't you rather be a raisin grower than a strawberry grower in terms of just your mental health, would you say? Looking at my friend, the strawberry grower in the back. So you see the high input cost. Here's the cost of fumigation, and it could be even higher than that, $1,000 an acre or more. But that's what makes it all possible. And the pear production, the organic pear production being higher because of the fertility, because of that compost and the feather meal. So that's what puts that cost up. In terms of weed control, the strawberry weed control is much higher because it's relying much more on hand labor, even though the conventional does rely on hand weeding. And then finally, so if we look at the resource use, if we look at machine labor, there's actually, so these are, what I mean by machine labor is a tractor operator, basically. So actually there's more pesticides sprayed in or conventional strawberries, so that's why this number is higher. In raisin grapes, it's pretty much the same. The pears, very similar, although more applications because of that early fertility activities, a little bit more in pears. Hand labor for organic, you see that much higher hand labor here, which includes because of the hand weeding. Raisins about the same. Pears, we didn't. This is just. Actually, I'm not sure why this is so high in the. Oh, because of the hand weeding around the trees. Sorry, that's why it's higher here. So gallons of fuel kind of follows the machine labor, higher where there's more operations, much higher with the pears. And then the water use we assumed was the same. We've never had a grower say that there is more or less water use, even though we see tremendous differences in field crops, but nobody wants to talk about that right now. But not in the orchards, because they're not really irrigating of the cover crops or anything like that. So I've gone through all of these practices, what the differences and similarities are. The fertilizer costs are higher for organic in all crops. The hand weeding is used on all crops except conventional pears, but higher costs for organic. Of course, that means higher labor. Insect and mite control, slightly higher for organic. Pears, but lower for strawberries and raisins because there's just less materials available, I think. Disease control costs lower for organic strawberries, raisins, and pears, but the diseased fruit, this is very important. That's in terms of materials applied, but for the strawberries, that doesn't count the additional labor cost at harvest where you're culling out the diseased fruit at harvest. So that cost was not captured here. So these are kind of some caveats that really relate to the strawberries that I did talk to already. There's fewer plants planted. Smaller equipment was used in the study for a different scale for the strawberries. And then I talked about the rotation again also for the strawberries. So that is it, except for my shameless advertisement, but David had one too. This is where all of these studies are. The Pear study is not quite up yet. Chuck and I finished it last Thursday, and I think we need to go over it with a little more, one more fine-tooth comb. It's had several combings, but it's one more sticky wicket that we need to iron out, but that will be posted sometime next week.
Thank you, Karen.